How's everyone doing today? It is Sunday, May 5th, 2024, and in the community tab, uh, last week or earlier this week, I posted a clue really about kind of some Bernando trivia, which I like to call Bernando trivia. So I posted a photo of cigars, chocolate cigars. Chocolate cigars had said Cuba on them. So, and I asked everyone a question about what did this visual clue tell you about Bernando? Don't think anyone answered over here. I had a few answers over on the Facebook page, but nothing over here. So I just wanted to take a little time to fill you in just for fun. The first answer is how did Bernando, or what was Bernando's nickname? What was Bernando's nickname? His nickname was Cuba. So this could be maybe confusing or misleading. You know, he was born in Brazil, but his nickname was Cuba. How did that come about? That came about because when my great-grandfather, when his dad brought him here to the United States, it was winter time and it was very, very cold. So Bernando, of course, as a child, had only been exposed and grown up in a tropical climate, right? Brazil is very, very warm. And suddenly he was brought to the East Coast where he was exposed to some very, very harsh conditions in terms of a change of temperature. So if you've ever lived in one climate for a long time and then you move to another climate, that's hotter or colder, that your body really can go through kind of a shock or some difficulty, what to speak of a child who's, maybe, only 6 years old. So Bernando Lapalo Sr., his dad, his relatives said to him, because he had some half-brothers, a couple of half-brothers, because initially they went to Philadelphia because they had family there, said, well, why don't you send him to Cuba? Because there was another relative that actually lived in Cuba. Why don't you send him to Cuba? He can spend the winter there, and then you can bring him back when when it gets warmer. So that was what occurred. So he spent his time there, away from his dad under the care of an uncle who lived in Cuba. So when he returned to the United States and it was time to go to school, it was like September, not speaking English very well, right? His classmates asked him what his name was. And he said Bernando, and they said, "Oh, no, 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 no. That's too much name. That's too complicated." So they said, "Well, where are you from?" And being a child, you probably understood, where did you just come from? He said Cuba. So he said, "Okay, we're going to call you Cuba. That's going to be your name. We're going to call you Cuba." So that is a nickname of his that stuck for his entire life. So that was the first answer. Actually, that's the first two answers. So in this response, you found out that Cuba was his nickname, and that you have found out how he got that nickname, named so by his young classmates. Hi, Felicia. Nice to see you. Yeah, I'm a busy gal, very busy, but I try and make the time, to come up here. It's nice to see you as well, so to speak. So now the second or the third, moving along right here, about this clue about cigars is that, did you know that my grandfather smoked cigars? Yes, my grandfather smoked cigars. He was fond of smoking cigars, and of course he would smoke cigars made in Cuba. Because Cuba was and probably still is considered to be the finest cigars, in the world, hand rolled and all of that. There used to be a place, actually, if any of you have ever visited Miami, And there used to be a place on Lincoln Road, which is kind of the main thoroughfare, where there was a little, Cuban cigar business, and you could go there and get hand rolled cigars, and there'd be a gentleman outside, hand rolling these cigars. So even though, my grandfather didn't really have any vices to speak of, he was fond of cigars. And I remember as a younger person myself, I'd say when he was in his, I remember when he was in his 70s, his 80s, and even in his 90s, he would enjoy a cigar. Now, when he got to be in his hundreds, he lost interest in that. But that's something that he enjoyed doing, puffing on his cigars. And although I do not like the smell of cigars, I found, of course, that when I was around my grandfather, if he smoked a cigar, I didn't mind. Of course, it's because I had a strong association and affection for him. But I also think it's because he smoked quality cigars, because a lot of these cigars are very cheap and they're very, very unpleasant to breathe in and to be around. So that was the third thing I wanted to say. Um, the last thing in the photo, if you read the label carefully, you notice that they were chocolate cigars. So obviously my grandfather wasn't smoking chocolate cigars, but you'll see, they'll do this type of thing, at least when I was a kid, maybe when you were a kid too. They would do, candy cigarettes and chocolate cigars, and kind of a little dubious, but they would do these things. But I thought how interesting, because of course Bernando was a proponent of raw chocolate, and that is because raw chocolate, unprocessed chocolate, is very high in magnesium, and magnesium is a trace mineral, which is very important for many different bodily functions. I believe at least 300 bodily functions, aside from metabolism and your nervous system. I remember my grandfather telling me that magnesium would keep the color in your hair. So, in other words, when you undergo stress, uh, sometimes people's hair will turn gray. Their hair will turn gray when they undergo stress, because essentially they use up all the reserves of magnesium in the body, right? And it's gone. So it's important to replace the things that you use in the body. I mean, you can see here, I've got a few gray hairs here, and I know I can attribute that to some stressful times that I went through. And I remember when I saw this on myself, I thought, oh no, I got to get out of this situation, because this situation is making my hair turn gray. And I am too young to have gray hair. And to that end, I remember hanging out with my grandfather when he was still living in Jackson Heights, Queens. This is before he moved to North Carolina. And I think I was, he was sitting down in his den, and I was standing over him. We were talking, and then I noticed one gray hair. I mean, at this point, he was already like, he was like, like in his 90s. At this point, he was like, what, 90? It's probably about 92 or so, because he left for North Carolina around that time, around 93, around 93, 94. And I was like, oh, Grandpa, you have a gray hair. So, make sure that you're getting enough magnesium in your diet. You can get it from plant-based supplements as well. Usana Health Sciences actually has got a good plant-based magnesium, calcium supplement. Those are things that you want to take together. Good for your bones, your nervous system, your hair, and all those different things. But again, you could also consume raw, unprocessed chocolate. Let's say I see someone here is posting things about death metal and Nirvana. Okay, interesting. Bernando kept, hey, Sue, Bernando kept his stress level down because he took the time to relax every day. He was very unbothered. Relaxation for him was part of his lifestyle. It's something that he did every day. He got up early, he went to work, he put in an honest day's work, whether he was working in a restaurant or whatever he was doing. And when he came home, he said, it is time to relax, and I have a very distinct memory of him coming home and, we're talking a little bit. And then he said, now it's time to relax. And he went into his den and he closed the door because he used to watch the ball game. He was a big Yankees fan. So he'd watch the ball game. He'd go in there and, spend a few hours with his feet up in his lazy boy chair, relaxing. So it's very important to find something that you find relaxing. It's very, very important. I know that, in this world and the way life is sold to us now, we have to be productive and working and doing stuff all the time. But what people don't realize in that is that when you relax and when you sleep at night, that is when your body heals and that's when your body repairs itself. It's also important to sit down and take the time to reflect. And if you're always if you're always running, you can't reflect. You can't reflect on your life. You can't reflect on how things are going. You can't reflect on your choices. You end up becoming reactive instead of being responsive. So that's what Bernando did. The other clue that I gave you in that, which you might not have known, which I think I talked about this in a previous video. I'm going to see if I can find it. But another funny thing is, my grandfather was a working man and a family man during the time of Prohibition, right? And he always had a hustle going on. He always had something going on. He'd always say, if you're working for someone else, you should have your own side business. Of course, I'm not necessarily saying that you should maybe engage in this type of activity, but it is what it is, and the times were what they were. So during the time of Prohibition, of course, there was a couple of things. There was a ban on alcohol, right? But by the same token, because of that ban, there was also a great demand for alcohol. So speakeasies and all these things popped up, and people would do things like make bathtub gin, right? Because the distilleries were closed and so on and so forth. So my grandfather had this buddy whose name I think was Al Schombaum, who had this little clandestine bathtub gin business going on because, anyway, because. And so my grandfather used to work at sea. And one of the ports of call that he would go to would be Cuba. So Cuba, as you may know, is a quality producer of rum. Now, I know that these days Puerto Rico, is strongly associated with the production of rum. But back in the day, Cuba, because Cuba also grows a lot of sugar cane and because of the climate and all that. So Cuban rum was considered to be very high quality. Now, of course, again, because of Prohibition, there was no rum, being exported to the United States, right? That was a no-no. So his buddy said, well, do you think you could bring back some labels, right? So in other words, they would make their own version of rum, right? And then they would bottle it, and then they would put a Cuban rum label on it and sell it to people that way. In other words, selling fake Cuban rum. So my grandfather explained to me that what he did is that he took the labels and he actually strapped them to his socks underneath his slacks. So unlike today, where you're like patted down for everything and you're scanned and you've got to go through all the stuff at the airport and when you get on a boat and all of that, back in the 30s, things were a lot more loose, right? I mean, there was a time when you didn't even need a passport actually to go to another country. A passport was something that was imposed later. So at any rate, it's not, there weren't really socks, but there used to be this type of, I don't know if they make them anymore. It's socks, but there used to be this almost kind of like sort of male suspenders in a way would actually keep your socks up and prevent them from falling down. I don't know if they make that kind of stuff anymore, but they did back in the day because your socks fall down and they get bunched up in your shoes, and who wants to deal with that? So he would actually put the labels in there, and then come back and, and, and use those labels. So there you go. So if you had any ideas that, my grandfather was a complete goody two shoes, your illusions have been shattered. He was not. So he made a few dollars that way. So there you go. What else do I want to say? That's really it. So I just wanted to say that if you want to learn more about how Bernando managed his stress on a daily basis, I really recommend that you read his books. I know I sound like a broken record, but you really need to read Age Less, Live More, Achieving Health and Vitality at 107 years and beyond. If anyone can write a book, in their 106th year and have it published when 107, I think they know what they're talking about. No, Sue, my grandfather was not introverted. He liked keeping his own company. He was an only child. He didn't feel the need for a lot of outside validation, but at the same time, he worked around people. He was a chef. He was in hospitality. He worked in restaurants. He did a lot of traveling. He had a very healthy, active social life, which is another reason why he lived so long. He wasn't this shut-in, isolated, sad person, and he loved telling stories. My grandfather loved to talk. I mean, that was a fun thing about uh, being around him, is that he had such a great memory and he could tell stories. Justin Ridlin, was he morally wrong though? No, it's like, there's things that we all do in life that, maybe we wouldn't think that we would do. But, as a man living in the 1930s with a wife to support and two children to raise and constantly being at sea, he probably thought, if I can make a little extra money by bringing back some labels, I'm gonna do it. Did he kill anybody? No. So there you have it. A lot of the things are just the times. I think maybe it's not going to be so difficult for us to understand these things as this, financial squeeze that so many of us are going through right now goes on, about how to keep your head above water. A lot of people are struggling with that. A lot of people are struggling with that. So it's probably, maybe, history tends to go in cycles, especially if we don't learn from it. So, we've got some very, 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 very wealthy people on the planet right now who are not good at sharing. They're not good at sharing. So if you look back to the 1930s and even before that, this was the rise of unions, right? To try and garner better wages for people, which really the golden age of that really probably culminated like in the 1950s, where a man could work in a factory or what have you not his whole life and actually retire with a pension, even if he was doing what would be considered today, menial work, right? I mean, now today, if you're working class, they try and make it seem like you don't work hard enough and that, you don't have bills to pay just like they do, and somehow you should be paid less, which is ridiculous. It's not like when you go to the store, someone's going to say, oh, you don't get paid as much as, the CEO who makes $1 million an hour, so we're going to give you a discount. It doesn't work like that. So I think that also, the value of work and the respect people had for work, was very, very different back in the day than it is now. People were trained, they were skilled at what they did. You were expected to be. Things were done manually, and you had to be on the ball. All right, my friends, I am going to get off now. This is a almost up to 20 minutes here. I really appreciate you being here. Again, if you have not gotten Bernando's books, I strongly encourage you to get them. I read his book really every year. And every year now, as I'm approaching 107, I'm 61 now, it resonates more with me in a different way than I did when I was younger because, I'm getting older and I'm just having different realizations as I navigate through the process of getting older and what that can mean and how valuable my health is. So you have a great rest of your Sunday and your weekend, and I will see you again, I hope, soon. Bye bye now.